Okay, I wanted to talk with you this week at this point in the semester, where everything's winding up, about exam study strategies. These are going to be techniques that are reflected in what we learned earlier in the semester that are going to apply equally well for exam study strategies. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the first step in preparing for finals is really assessing your midterms. And I talked some about this for last week's lecture, but I'll talk about it more pointedly now. You should take stock at this point in the semester of how midterms went in these ways. Not your score per se, but did you perform better or worse than you expected? How did you prepare? Did you feel prepared going into the exam? Was that feeling of being prepared misplaced? Were you not prepared but thought you were? Were your outlines complete? In other words, were issues raised on the exam that you didn't have in your outline? Did you complete practice questions? How did you prepare for that midterm? Did you have adequate time to finish? That's a very common concern, and one of the ways of being positioned to finish within adequate time is by practicing a lot. By practicing, you get the phrasings you need down, and you know when it comes to an exam what you're going to say, so you can just throw it on the page and move on to the analysis. Did you organize your questions properly? Your answers properly. You have to assess each of these things honestly to see what worked and what didn't work. If it did work for you, and you were appropriately prepared and that was confirmed by your performance, do more of what you did. If it didn't work, if what you did to prepare was ineffective, well, change it up. That's the way of the world. You have to change things up that aren't working. How are you going to prepare differently for finals compared to midterms? You view this through the prism of how you did on midterms because it gives you sort of not only a measuring stick of the material so far, but strategically it gives you an impression of how you should approach things. And that is invaluable at this point in the semester. So what changes are you going to make, both in preparation and the actual exam day? What are you going to do differently? Did you stay up all night before the midterm and it didn't go well? That's unsurprising because sleep is crucial for being able to perform this kind of analysis. But, those are the kind of things that you saw what worked and what didn't work. Be honest about that and change what. Here's some thoughts on how to successfully study for exams. First, you create a study schedule, not like the one at the beginning of the semester. This is for the remaining time that you have to study for exams and complete work that you have to. You want to make sure you complete your outlines. You want to use your outlines. You want to practice exams and problems. And I'll address each of these in turn. Why should you create and follow a study schedule? There's lots of benefits of doing this. It allows you to use effective study methods, things like forced recall, interleaving, and spaced repetition. Even now, those are useful tools that you can employ within this context. By penning them into a schedule saying, okay, on November 27th, from whenever to whenever, I'm going to be doing forced recall in torts to see where I stand on the rules and ascertain what I really have to study. By mixing up study topics within a given day, you will improve your comprehension of those topics overall. You don't spend all day doing the same thing. That could leave you burnt out very quickly. Instead, you want to switch topics up. in advance of the exam. As you get closer to each individual exam, you'll spend more and more time on that topic studying, but you still want to do the interleaving work that you've been doing. By having a schedule, you'll also have time to stay healthy. Eat right, exercise, sleep, and incorporate the things that you need to do in order to stay focused. Your mental and physical condition impact your performance, of course, on an exam. If you're overly stressed, if you're overly tired, if you haven't eaten because you're too stressed, and you haven't exercised in a while, and that's causing you stress, you're going to default to skipping all of those other things and just focusing on what's stressing you out and trying to fix your school. Well, sometimes the best way to fix school is to have a schedule that you follow that incorporates things like exercise, time to prep meals, and eat good meals. Not just to dial the phone and get whatever through Grubhub, but actually having these things built into the schedule will allow you to pursue them and not feel guilty about it. It's really a good idea. As you realize you need help and don't understand a topic, seek help. Get that help right away. Maybe not right away. You don't want to call your professor, every 15 minutes. I'm confused about new topic. I'm confused about new topic. Don't do that. Nobody wants that. The other alternative, the other extreme, however, is when you save up all of your questions to ask, say, the first week in December. You don't get bonus points for having won a question session with your professor or TA. Seek help as you discover that you need it, because those topics in law often build off of one another. And if you don't get that one right, you may not get the next one right that builds on it. So you want to firm up your understanding as you go along. If there are things that at the end of the day you don't understand, sending an email to colleagues, TAs, or professors is entirely appropriate. They may be able to help you. And again, you can always seek answers from horn books, outline books, all these different study tools that you have. But get that help along the way. Don't store it up to ask them all those questions at once. Let's turn to outlines. You want to complete your outlines real soon now. And for those in computer science, you understand what real soon now means as an internet term, but real soon now means it should be a priority, recognizing that your outlines will take a little more work to complete, so it won't be right now, it'll be real soon now. You want to make sure that your outlines are updated to the class that you'll be having. As you get to this point in the semester, the amount of material that you'll have to synthesize and integrate into your outlines will decrease, because you will have gone through all the backlog and you're just now consuming new material that you'll be incorporating in your outline as you go along. And in fact, you can add that additional information after each class. That's a very efficient way of including it into your outline, because it's fresh in your mind and it keeps your outline up to date, and it keeps that task out of your to-do list and lets you go forward with a clean mind. So putting forward that effort right after class is a really good way to do it. If you are behind in outlining, and some of you are, and that's just the reality, that's fine. Not ideal, but there are ways of fixing it now. What I suggest is that if you are behind in outlining, which is to say that you don't have a complete outline and you haven't done it yourself, you've used other people's, you still should aim to consume that information yourself and synthesize that information yourself. To catch up, what you should do is dedicate some time and incorporate that incidentally into your study schedule. Time for catching up in your outlines. And during that block of time, the amount of time you should spend is probably proportional to the amount of time you have to catch up. You go through that process of catching up in your outline, you will put yourself in good stead for the exam. And then you have to, after creating your outlines, use your outlines. I talked about this some last week, but I'll reiterate it some now in the context of finals prep. You want to review and study your outlines. When you read through your outlines, that is not a good way of studying in and of itself. Standing on its own, reading and rereading your outlines will not put you in a good position on the exam. Let me be very clear about that. If you just reread the same document, i.e. your outline, over and over and over again, you will stop processing it. It's been shown in many cog-psych studies that repeated reading is not a good way of learning. Even back to middle school, SQ3R, right? Different, you don't just read, you engage actively with the material. So the good thing to get out of a reading of an outline is to remind yourself and to review the scope and depth of the material that you've learned. Remember, your outline is the corpus of material you have to know for that class. So that will, when you read through it, remind you of the scope and depth of everything that you covered. That's a good reminder. There may be dark corners of material that you forgot about that reading an outline will remind you of. Another task, as if you don't have enough tasks in your life, but this is a useful one that I would do, and that is to condense your outlines. There may be material in your outline that is not going to be useful on an exam. For example, your professor may say, hey, we aren't covering this topic. You can take that out of your condensed outline. Sometimes, commonly actually in law, people present older cases. Bless you. That was my wife. It's just like a real class. People sneeze and it's fine. But in law school, a lot of times people will present old law as a way of building to what the modern view is. Some of those old cases have tremendous pedagogical value, but aren't necessarily what you have to write about on an exam. If you have some of that and you can confirm with your TA or professor, you can pull that out of your sharpened outline. That's what I mean by condensing your outlines, making them very high signal to noise. If you do data processing, you understand what I mean, but you want to make them high value. You want to have the content, everything in there be relevant, and everything relevant should be in there. Like I talked about last week, you can use your outlines to answer if you're going to be having that kind of exam where you can use your outline on your exam. You could practice using your outline to answer practice questions. If you can't use your outline on an exam, guess what? You shouldn't use your outline in practicing questions. Even if you do poorly on that practice question, it's of greater value than if you look at your notes while answering it and you won't have your notes on the exam. You want to have an honest assessment through practice questions of where you are, not where you might be if you had all this material memorized. So don't use your outlines on practice questions, especially if you're going to be able to not going to be able to use the outline on the exam. You can use your outline even now to create flashcards and to memorize rules. Flashcards are a great way of memorizing rules, but any forced recall technique where you start with a blank piece of paper and just write down the rule for battery, write down the rule for whatever, what does the restatement seconds say about contract formations? What's the rule for the mailbox rule? All those kinds of things can go into flashcards and forced recall exercises right now. Where do you get that information? From your outline. You can also use here's a couple of other points about your outline. You can't rely on them as your sole study tool. There will be things for which you need greater or more detailed explanations. Use those horn books, use those outline books now to supplement your outline. You need to feel comfortable with the material in an outline. But you also need to feel comfortable with the scope and depth of the material that you have to cover without an outline. And that's true even if you're allowed the outline on the exam. Typically, if you're allowed an outline on an exam, there'll be more time pressure on that exam. Not always, but going into the exam, presume that so you're prepared. In that way, you can't use an outline as a check for everything you write because you'll just run out of time. It's a great way of checking things you're unsure of during an exam. But it most of the time in an exam should be spent writing the exam, not reviewing your outline. You need to have a working understanding of that document, of course. However, you really need to be comfortable with the material without that outline. That is where the outline actually provides the greatest benefit to you because you can use that outline to verify what you already are confident that you know. And in that way, you should use a similar approach for all your exams, regardless of whether you'll be using an outline on the exam or not. Because a successful exam experience comes from preparation. That preparation is understanding how the law works within that corpus that you have to know and practicing a demonstration of your understanding through practice questions. That's the study approach that you should use for exams, regardless of the outline. Additionally, with an outline, you should familiarize yourself with the structure and content. If you're going to be using that on the exam, you have to know where to look for what you need to know. And the better you know that document, the better, more quickly, you'll be able to do that on an exam when you have to. Again, the preparation generally should be the same. There will be some differences, of course, but the foundational preparation and study approaches that you employ will be the same regardless of whether you're using an outline or not. So to create a study schedule, I wanted to give you a couple of tips. One, you want to work backwards from the date of your exam. I recognize that your exam format may be very different from exam to exam. Some may you may have multiple days to work on. Some you may have a block you have to choose of a certain number of hours. Whenever you start that block is up to you. And regardless, you'll have a time when you're going to have that exam. Work backwards from that date. Think about what you need to know. Think about what you need to study still, particularly, and write that list out for each of your classes. It may feel daunting, but that's when you pull in the schedule. And you start assigning these tasks to different days in your schedule, working backwards from your exam. It would be wise, at least 2 weeks before your exams, if you were in a position where your outlines were done and you were just practicing questions. Great. If that's your goal, you want to work backwards so that all of your outlines are completed by 2 weeks before your exam. Whatever your goals are, if that's not realistic and it's 1 week, well, okay. Be realistic in creating this and what you expect to accomplish with your time. Make sure you leave time to finish, update, condense your outlines. It's always very important. But even more important than that polishing is answering practice questions. So don't drop one for the other. Don't drop your outlines to practice questions. Don't skip questions to finalize your outlines. If you're going to skew that balance, I'd skew it towards answering practice questions. Because, like I've said before, there's only so many ways of answering these things and of asking these kinds of questions. The more questions you do, the more prepared and comfortable you'll be going into the exam. You want to use the effective learning strategies that we talked about earlier in the semester. And that includes retrieval practice. Remember, just as a reminder, retrieval practice is when you start with a blank piece of paper, a blank screen, new Word doc, and write out the definition of intent, write out the definition or rule for whatever. By doing that, again, you will be necessarily honest with yourself about what you know and what you don't know. So these are things that you can put into your study schedule as well. Just say, okay, I'm going to do retrieval practice on this date for a couple hours or for an hour, half hour, whatever it might be, depending on where you are and how much you have memorized to assess where I am. To assess where you are, not where I am. I'm on my couch. Also, continue to use spaced repetition. I'll expand on this in just a sec. But with spaced repetition, as you've done all semester, you're going to, you're interleaving. I'm sorry, interleaving is different. Spaced repetition is when, you know, you revisit things from earlier in the semester at points throughout your studying the rest of the semester. So, for example, you probably don't remember the concepts from the first 3 weeks of school nearly as well as you think you do. Go back, look at those again explicitly. Do a couple problems relating to those issues. Make sure you have a handle on what's going on from those early lectures. Everybody's head was spinning probably early on. Go back and unspin that head. I don't think that's a phrase anyone's ever used before, and I apologize. Regardless, spaced repetition is a very useful tool even now. Start reviewing stuff from the beginning of the semester, work towards stuff that you picked up at the end of the semester. That automatically builds spacing into it. And finally, interleaving. If you recognize that when you study for a solid block of time, and I mean like 6 hours or something, 4 hours, whatever, long period of time, that you are not as productive across that whole time as, you're going to have differences in productivity during that time. And part of that is from burning out. And before I move on to other study activities, remember, when you're burning out, switch topics. That can help you out. So, study generally should involve reviewing and condensing outlines, rewriting rules flashcards, creating flashcards, going over flashcards, studying the rules and how they work with either flashcards, hypotheticals, whatever you may want. Quizzing yourself, your study partners. What is a good defense against trespass to land? Do you know? Look it up. If you don't know and you quiz yourself and you aren't sure, look it up right then so that you can resolve that question in your mind and move on. Again, you want to answer practice questions and released exams. Anything from your professor is gold. Review it repeatedly. Practice those questions multiple times. It'll put you in a good position. Even if you've answered them already, you can review them. The way I like to review, if I've already answered a question, for example, and I didn't have any others to study with, was just to write an outline again on how I would approach that problem. Rather than writing out a whole answer to something that I'd already written an answer out to, I would generate that outline and then check it using my outline, my content outline, the organizational outline that I created for that answer was my review of that question. Again, seek out answers to the questions that you have. And just do more of it. Do more of all of this. Do more practice questions, just like the otters say, more. Here's some topics to consider for interleaving. Notice when you're burning out. Everybody knows when they burn out. Or you've burned out this semester at multiple points probably, and so you're well familiar with it now. Consider taking a break to get your head out of that space. Eat, exercise, jump on IG for a little bit, whatever your jam is. Consider taking that break for a bit. And then consider switching topics. That's an interleaving experience, right? If you are burnt out on Civ Pro, switching to contracts could pep you right up somehow. I guess that happens with contracts sometimes. Doesn't with me, but maybe it will with you. Consider switching topics. Your brain will perk up. It will engage the material differently. That's interleaving at its core. And do that when you're studying. There is no point when you're burnt out to just churning over the same stuff that you aren't reading. Like, I just read a paragraph, I don't know what it says. You're burnt out. Take a break. Go back to it in a little bit. For breaks between study blocks on a main topic. And if you still want to be productive between those main study blocks, what you can do is review an outline, get a handle of the scope and depth of the corpus you're studying. Just do, if you've been doing essay questions, switch to multiple choice, vice versa. If you've been doing multiple choice, switch to an essay. Review your class notes, reread any bothersome cases. If you don't understand, say, a property concept or whatever it might be, go look it up. If you, for example, don't understand springing versus shifting executory interests, go look it up. There's outline books that are really good on that. Ask your professor, ask your TA. Here's some things to remember generally. And my transitions are horrible. So let me talk about these 2 points first. Your grades don't define you as a person at all. There's so much more to practice of law than how you did in law school. There are myriad skills, presentation and negotiation and everything else that goes into the practice of law isn't defined by your grades, nor are you defined by your grades. You're going to study, you're going to perform, you're going to do okay. Look, remember, you did the work all semester. And leading up to finals, you're going to do the work. You are going to be prepared and you will succeed. Why? Because the work will bear fruit. You reap what you sow. And you, throughout the semester, have sown a tremendous crop that you're going to reap during finals because you will be prepared. You have the tools to understand this material and master this material, and you're going to be able to do it. You're going to do it. To do that, you have to relax. Remember, this is an exam. You're going to write it, and you're going to walk out of there. Relax. It's going to be fine. You've prepped. Execute when you get in there. Don't stress out. Trust your training. Throughout this whole semester, you've essentially gone through a legal boot camp in a sense. It's been tough at times. It's been straining at best, humbling at best, humiliating at worst at times. But in all of that, you've trained yourself to think more like an attorney. And when you get to your exams, you're going to demonstrate that training. You are going to destroy these exams because you have prepped and you're ready. Trust that training. And finally, which is a very exciting transition, practice questions will make you calmer at the time of the exam, game day. There are only so many ways of asking these questions. The more practice questions you do, the more comfortable you will be with how someone might ask you that, 1. And 2, what you will say when confronted with that fact pattern. What's the rule I want to say? Boom, I know how to say it for this kind of circumstance because I've seen it before. That is the value of practice questions, and all of these things together, all of the tools, all of the study techniques, and all of the time you've put in, all the work that you've put in, are going to put you in a position to excitingly, sorry about that transition. I saw it and thought it was exciting. But look, you're going to be able to do this. You're going to destroy this. You're going to do well. If you have any questions during your prep, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to help. I want to help. You know my email address. I've mailed you a ton of times during the semester. You can just email me. If I don't know the answer, I'll work with you to get the answer. I look forward to seeing you this semester if I do, and next semester in your remaining years at Duquesne. I really look forward to it. If you're into patent law, I very much look forward to seeing you in my classes. And remember, relax. Go in there and execute. Good luck. Be well.